Welcome to the Christchurch Fox Chapel podcast. It's the fastest growing conservative, evangelical, charismatic
Anglican
podcast in the entire Fox Chapel area.
Oh, hello.
Hello?
Good to be here.
Oh, it's you. Sorry, I thought by the way you were speaking it was FF Bruce that I was sitting with.
Yes.
Yes.
FF Bruce and
Winston Churchill. The baby-eating Bishop of Bath and Wells.
Yes.
And quite possibly a certain character from the MTV hit cartoon, Beavis and his friend.
Yes. Yes, that's correct. No,
Yeah.
it is Beavis.
Beavis. Oh, that is Beavis.
Yeah.
That one. That's Beavis, is it?
Yep.
And not the other guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
But to my knowledge, I don't think FF Bruce ever got a part-time job in a hot dog shop and drank directly from the soda fountain. Don't think he ever did that. So where did his voice come from?
He has many things that you don't know about. He is... Oh, I hope a family of FF Bruce never find this podcast.
Well, unless they're like massively into cartoons from the 90s on MTV.
Yeah. Or maybe they would be thrilled with this podcast. They'd be like, wow, his legacy lives on.
He's our
And
favorite.
his voice, too.
And his voice. He's our favorite scholar.
Yeah. We're in Hebrews 12.
Yes.
We're back at it after our special edition podcast, and we're in the second half of Hebrews 12.
Which conjures up many images from Exodus chapters 19 and 20, which is when Moses is on Sinai, and there's the tempest and the noise, the thunder, the lightning, and the presence of God. And the people say, "Are you threatening me?" I believe.
I always read that. I always heard of the story of Moses getting the 10 Commandments as a kid. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until I was an adult that I read that and realized how terrifying that must have been.
It's immensely terrifying. There's an allusion to this here. In verse 18 it says, "You've not come to what may be touched, a blazing fire and darkness and gloom and a tempest and the sound of a trumpet and the voice of whose words made the hearers beg that no further messages be spoken to them. For they could not endure the order that was given. If even a beast touches the mountain, it shall be stoned. Indeed, so terrifying was the sight that Moses said, 'I tremble with fear.'" So this is this is taking us right back to the time when Moses went up Mount Sinai to receive the commandments, and he said to guys, you stay here, and all heaven breaks out, and people are terrified.
He goes up there and there's like fire coming out and this giant storm swirling at the top of the mountain, and they kind of assume that he's dead.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of rules about, because the presence of God is so palpable that people may not go anywhere near. But it's pretty evident as the account progresses that very few of them needed such warnings. They were able to figure out from this terrifying sight and sound that staying away was a really good idea.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of like Area 51, right? There's only like a few fools who are trying to get into Area 51.
Yeah, that's right.
Like, I don't want to go there. Like,
Yeah, no.
I have no desire.
No one in the right mind would go anywhere near the place. And this is a terrifying sight. And, so the God is often revealing himself. The sort of theophanies in the Old Testament, the revelations of God, frequently happen through something, don't they? Like fire and smoke in particular.
Yeah, these are things that... we experience them as being very powerful, mm-hmm. right? Fire will eat you up. Mm-hmm. Storms, powerful. Like, there's nothing in the world quite as powerful as a storm.
No, especially when it's right over your head.
Yeah. And so, like, all this stuff, it communicates something about who God is, which is that God is powerful.
And he's leading them in the day with this pillar of smoke and in the night with this pillar of fire. And so
Yeah.
You might just say, well, fire is a bit frightening. But if the fire was always in this great big column right in front of you in the dust, burning nothing, it would have an enormous impression on you.
Yeah.
This thunderstorm is only over the mountain when Moses goes up. It's not a natural thunderstorm. It's evidently a supernatural one. So it would have a profound impact on you.
Yeah.
And this goes on throughout Scripture. You get this sort of thing, the smoking pot that passes through the people. There's the fiery furnace with the angelic or godly figure with the men.
The fiery bush that Moses sees.
Obvious, yeah.
I've heard somebody, I think it was the Bible Project people.
Mm-hmm. Tim Mackey and the other guy.
And the other guy, yeah. I think they said,
his friend.
So the bush is like, it's like Israel, right? Subsumed in the presence of God and yet not consumed.
Yeah.
So everything about God looks terrifying. How do we navigate this whole thing of like, you should fear, like Moses is terrified. Mm-hmm. And, the Proverbs say the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So should we be afraid of God?
Yes, I think so. It's just a different type of fear. And I wrestled with this a few weeks ago when I wanted to say, God has, through faith, called us not to have fear, but to have, expectation or something. But in my notes from my sermon a few weeks ago, I was thinking actually the opposite of fear is not fearlessness. I think the opposite of fear is fear of something else, actually. You hear this in all sorts of situations where people say, well, I was too afraid to stay put. The building's on fire. Why did you take this huge risk and jump out the window? Well, I was too afraid to stay in the building. So I did something else that I was afraid of and I jumped out of the window. Yeah. People will often not be afraid of one thing because they're afraid of something else.
Well, Jesus says this, like, don't fear people, but fear him who is able to put body and soul, throw body and soul into hell.
Right.
Which does not mean the devil. He means fear God.
Right.
Like you should be afraid of God.
So you can have, if you like, positive fear and negative fear. You might put it that way. And so you're absolutely right. This passage has both, right? So we have this little comment with Moses who says, I tremble with fear in verse 21. Uh-huh. And right at the end of the passage, and we'll get there later, it says in verse 28, let's worship God with reverence and awe. And both of those words mean fear, actually, kind of. So they're just different types. So reverence means godly fear, and it's eulabia, dread. But piety, religious reverence, I think, dread, I think is actually quite a good one, isn't it? The dread of God kind of filled me. Just the sense of, whoa.
Yeah, like a numinous experience, like an experience of that God is other.
Right.
And anytime it's going to freak us out.
And or deos also means fear or reverence.
Deos.
So with reverence and reverence, or with fear and fear, is what it says at the end. So that's interesting. We've got this kind of idea of maybe a very fear in the sense of apprehension of harm. Oh no, the lightning bolt's going to get me. To this sort of fear of, oh wow, God's amazing, and I'm afraid of missing out on this. Or I'm just impressed.
I'm trying to think of a good metaphor because it's like this.
Aslan.
Yeah, I kind of went there in my mind too.
I think that's the way. I think that's the metaphor.
So Chronicles of Narnia, C.S. Lewis is this lion. Jesus manifests himself as a lion in the story, or the lion is the Christ figure, I guess. And what's that quote? He said,
I think is it one of the kids says, is he good?
Is he tame?
Is he tame?
Is he tame?
Yeah.
And they're like,
is he safe?
Is he safe? And like, no, he's not tame. He's not safe, but he's good.
Yeah, that's right. That's it.
And so I guess you can you come up against God and you know that God could smite you or destroy you if he so wanted at any moment.
Which is another facet of why we worship, is that he doesn't.
Yeah.
That he uses that power instead to redeem and to save is part of why we worship him. But the fear doesn't go away. The sense of, wow, isn't he powerful? That stays. So I think Aslan is actually a really great image. I'm going to C.S. Lewis again.
Well, Lewis is, in his own biography, he writes in Surprised by Joy that like his first conversion to becoming like a theist or it wasn't a happy thing. He was terrified. Like he came up against the inescapable reality that there is a God, and he was like, this is bad news for me. Like, so fear is a good place to start.
And so Hebrews digging into this image from Exodus of the people of God seeing a manifestation of God through fire and lightning and tempest and on the mountain and being afraid of it. That was their sort of mountain experience. So they have a sort of experience of God in Egypt, right? They have an even closer experience of God here on Mount Sinai. And Hebrews says, but you haven't come to that kind of experience. You have not come to what may be touched, blazing fire, darkness, gloom, tempest, yada, yada. You have not come to a Mount Sinai type of experience. But, he says, verse 22, or she says, you have come to Mount Zion.
Different mountain. What's Mount Zion?
Mount Zion is the hill that Jerusalem is built on.
Yeah.
There is a Mount Zion right now in Israel today, and it's nearby. It's a different place.
Wait, isn't the temple on top of Mount Zion?
Yeah, but there's like a place called Mount Zion in like it's like just outside Jerusalem. It's somewhere else today. There's a modern place of the same name. So if you go on Google Earth or whatever, you might look at the wrong one.
Oh, okay.
But Mount Zion is the hill that Jerusalem is built on.
Yeah, Jerusalem covers a few different hills. Yeah, but Zion is the main one
with the temple on it.
And the idea is that is sort of pointing toward a heavenly reality where God really meets with man. So there's
you think about it, right? This is the place where the temple is, which is the place where the presence of God is. It's the place where the Holy of Holies is. It's essentially heaven on earth. Yeah. So it's a much, much closer experience. Because with Mount Sinai, right, no one was allowed to even touch. It says here, if even a beast touches the mountain, it shall be stoned. So, your little sheep or whatever that you're looking after, if it wanders too close to the mountain, because it's unholy and it's close to the presence of God, you have to kill it. And you don't wring its neck, because then you've just touched the sheep, and that means you have to be killed.
You have to throw rocks at it.
You have to kill it by remote. Yes.
I didn't even catch that. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So you can't even touch the thing that touched the edge of the bottom of the mountain where God is on Sinai.
Yeah.
But you've come to Mount Zion, and that's a very different experience, because not only can you touch sheep that go to Mount Zion, you can live there, you can sleep there, you can go to the bathroom there, you can marry there, get a job. Yeah. It's a city. So I think what it's saying is that you have come to a much closer experience of the power of God, and somehow it's more survivable than the old one.
So we're brushing up against heaven, right? You've come to Mount Zion and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem. So
I think we changed gear. Yeah.
And to the innumerable angels in festal gathering, and to the assembly of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven. What does that mean?
And to God, the judge of all.
And to God, the judge of all, and to the spirits of the righteous made perfect.
Yeah. So I think this is saying, I think we've got two layers going on here. In the Old Testament, there's the Egypt experience of God, right? Where and it's so bad at times, they kind of think God has given up on them.
Yeah.
And then there's the Mount Sinai experience of God, which is like way better, but it's terrifying. And you can't really get that close because it'll kill you.
Yeah.
Right. And then you've got the Mount Zion experience also in the Old Testament. They lived in Jerusalem, right? They had a temple, they built it. So you can see you've gone from Egypt to Sinai and from Sinai to Zion with increasing proximity.
Yes.
Right. And we know that this book takes everything they knew and says how the Christian experience or Christ is like that, only bigger.
Yeah.
What it's saying is we've come to of the three Old Testament experiences, ours is most like Zion. But we haven't come to Zion. We haven't come to the actual Mount Zion. We haven't come to the temple with a high priest and a sacrifice and Judaism.
So
we've come to something like it, only bigger.
we come to the heavenly one, the real one.
We've come to the heavenly one.
So
Yes.
so there's this I guess going back to that theme of fear, right? The way that someone should start by approaching God is to fear God, like fear, be terrified.
Yes.
And yet, listen, he's saying you're in a different, you are coming to God under a completely different set of terms than just your standard, than someone who hasn't been bought by the blood of Christ. You're under a new covenant.
Yeah.
And you're entering, you're coming up to a heavenly reality that's sort of the fulfillment of everything that the Old Testament is looking toward.
And I guess you've already alluded to it, and maybe we'll get to it, the how do we get there question in a moment. But where are we? I think first of all is worth saying. Well, it's most like Mount Zion, but it's bigger or better than that. It's the real heavenly reality that Old Testament Zion only pointed to, right?
This is a picture of heaven, right?
Well, at least a picture of heaven. It may even be heaven.
Yeah, so okay, yeah,
because it says you have come to. I mean, it's a past tense, right? Which is interesting. The city of the living God. Okay, that sounds a bit like heaven. Heavenly Jerusalem. That sounds a lot like heaven. Innumerable angels in feastal gathering. That sounds a lot like heaven.
Okay, it's a party with non-human supernatural beings.
The assembly of the firstborn. That sounds a lot like heaven. Enrolled in heaven. That sounds a lot like heaven. Judge, that sounds a lot like heaven, and the spirits of the righteous made perfect, which sounds a lot like heaven. And to Jesus, we know where he is. He's in heaven, so that sounds a lot like heaven. So I think that this is saying, I didn't count them, 7, 8 ways.
Yeah.
You're in heaven right now.
Wait, right now.
Right now. And so why say it 7 or 8 times, which is ridiculous? I think say it 7 or 8 times because the idea is ridiculous. So it has to be said over and over and over and over and over and over again, so that we understand he's not just using hyperbole, but he's speaking about a reality. He is saying, in reality, you have a relationship with God that is so proximate that it is heaven already.
Heaven is now and here.
You have come
if you're in
to,
Christ.
You have come to, and then he says something like heaven, 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 and like heaven.
So you have come to this in the sense of he's speaking to this group of Hebrew believers who are in persecution there, and he's just told them, hey, by faith, all of these other messed up people in the Old Testament served God's purposes, and they've been waiting for this fulfillment, and we're surrounded by this great cloud of witnesses. So, hey, look to Jesus and consider all the suffering that he endured. God's disciplining you through these things, and press on in, press deeper, cling more deeply, abide more deeply in Christ, because even in the middle of all of your suffering and stuff, you're pressed into the reality of heaven. Here and now.
I think so. And this would be consistent with a few things. So we have found through our reading of this that thinking back to the Old Testament for a moment and to the temple in particular, that the Holy of Holies, or the most holy place, was essentially heaven on earth. Right? It was a 20 cubit cube of heaven, right? Or whatever it was, 24.
Yeah.
Well, if we've come to something that's like a temple, right?
Yes.
Through someone who's like a high priest, only bigger, then it stands to reason that our little slice of heaven must be bigger too. So it's not an outrageous thing to say. We've gone from Egypt, where they were miles away, to Sinai, where they were pretty close, to Zion, where they were really close, where there was heaven on earth. We've come to something even better than that. And so it must be even more heavenly.
So this is as heaven as it gets.
And I don't know about that. I don't know about that.
How does it get more heaven?
Well, we've come to the fullness of heaven already, and it's going to get fuller yet. I think is the point. And this is what the scholars like F.F. Bruce would call inaugurated eschatology.
Inaugurated eschatology. Eschatology being the study of last things, the end of the world, study of what's going to happen, how life will end, or how the story of existence will come to a conclusion. Yes. And inaugurated, just like we have an inauguration for a president, right? That's the beginning. Yeah. So, and the end has begun already.
Yes, we've arrived at the beginning of the end. I think is a great way of putting it. It's very Churchillian. And there you go. An F.F. Bruce idea that was also a Churchillian idea. They really are the same person. I don't know the great Cornholio ever elucidated such thoughts on MTV, but different audience perhaps.
Well, that actually is a source of great hope in troubled times, right? Like if the world, I've hear a lot of people say the world's going to crap, right? All the time. Maybe people have been saying that forever. Maybe we're in a unique situation. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But if it is,
yes,
even if things are getting worse outside, the hope here is actually that even in the middle of really difficult things, your future is more heaven.
Yes. And you get this idea, right? In verse 26 onwards, maybe, let's have a look, see if we can, it's a bit Hebrew-y, but let's see. Yet once more I will shake not only the earth, but also the heavens. So even though in a sense we've already come, verse 22, to Mount Zion. That is perfect tense. We've already arrived in heaven.
There.
However, verse 27 says, yet once more indicates the removal of things that are shaken. That is to say, things that have been made, in order that things cannot be shaken may remain. So we are going to find that there is another part of the story yet to come, and that is the wrapping up of this world, and the wrapping up of the heavens, and the bringing down of a new Jerusalem, which is an idea from Revelation 21, that a new Zion or a new Jerusalem, the full thing, will fully and permanently and finally descend and be fused with where we are right now.
Yeah.
So we have come to the beginning of the heavenly era.
Okay.
And yet this endless heavenly era has a lot more to go yet, including the final wrapping up of all matters.
Yeah.
So I don't know, maybe you say we've got 1 foot in heaven and 1 foot back where we used to be or something like that.
Yeah.
We've entered, but there's a lot more yet to come. That's the idea that is being played out here. The fact that he goes to such great lengths to say heaven, so many different ways, just makes me think that he wanted to make sure they got it, or maybe even there'd be some pushback here. How can you possibly say we're in heaven when my auntie just died and we just got mugged by the Romans? How can you possibly say my lawnmower broke? How can you possibly say we're in heaven right now?
Your lawnmower did break, right?
It did break, yeah.
Yeah.
They didn't have lawnmowers then because the lawnmower was invented in 1830, but
they had goats.
Goats. The goat had been invented. Those that survived the experience of Mount Sinai.
Yeah. But so...
yeah.
I lost my thought.
Well, that I think is typical of this passage.
Yeah. Well, I guess if we're... the objection, this was my thought, is that, the objection can be like, really? This is heaven? Like, my life is full of suffering. I'm not at peace with myself. I feel like my spiritual life is in the dumps, and everything about me is kind of like, it's just a mess. And how can this be heaven, someone might say? But I think that the way I would respond to that, well, the scripture says that wherever Jesus Christ, this is eternal life, knowing Jesus Christ our Lord, John 17:3.
It started already.
But also like experientially, if you've experienced the grace of God in any way, if you've felt the Holy Spirit causing you, bringing you like a kind of kindness or goodness or gentleness that you didn't have before, then that's, multiply that by 1 billion and you have the full experience of heaven. But it is a little bit of a taste. It's something there.
A foretaste.
Yeah.
Or a taste. I think foretaste is too weak. It's a taste.
Yeah.
But there's more to come.
It's the first bite of the apple that
the
never
first
ends.
bite. It's the first fruits. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I think that's probably a better idea.
So it's crazy to think that like the world could get absolutely wonky and crazy from here. It could get worse. Like all the things that people are absolutely afraid of.
It will end.
Yeah.
It'll be shaken. So it won't just get worse. It'll die.
It will be,
completely.
So
it won't just get worse. It'll get worse is too weak.
Yeah.
It will cease.
It will cease. And
that's bad.
And yet we will be more happy than we are now.
There's a burning away or refining away of the dross, and in the shaking of the world, and by the way, all the things we trust in the world, getting shaken away until they've gone.
Yeah.
What remains is just that which is heavenly. And we've already got it. Let us be grateful, verse 28, for receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken. It doesn't say, let us be grateful that we might receive a kingdom one day that can't be shaken, or that we could receive it, or we will receive it. It says we've received it.
We received it. So
there's a lot of effort here to convince us that we have, in fact, already laid hold of heaven. And of course, we need a lot of persuading, because the reality of our experience is often when we see more of the shaky things.
Yeah.
Don't we?
Maybe we tend to obsess over those.
So this leaves an unanswered question, at least one. Well, probably more than one. And that is, how did we get in to heaven? How did we make it? And how did we arrive here?
Well, verse 24, right? Am I stealing your thunder by going right there?
You're stealing my thunder. It's the Lord's thunder.
Yeah,
and
well,
I don't think
anyone can steal his thunder.
He's authorized you to thunder. So
yeah,
go for it.
We've come to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant. We've talked about this already in Hebrews. And to the sprinkled blood, we've talked about this already in Hebrews, that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. We've talked about this already in Hebrews. Yes. So
Abel gets killed by his brother.
Yeah, he was murdered. And his murder was sort of the first real sharp edge of the intrusion of sin and death in the world. I mean, I guess Adam and Eve being banned from the garden, but there's something about getting murdered by your brother that's a little bit more serious.
And Abel's blood cries out from the ground for vengeance.
Yeah. Jesus' blood
cries out from the cross
for absolution.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so it's blood that continues to speak in the same way that Abel's continues to speak. And by the way, this is bringing us back to Abel, who was mentioned at the beginning of chapter 11. So this whole thing must be a gigantic chiasm in some way.
Chiasm.
A chiasm, in the words of our esteemed FF Bruce.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're back at Abel, but like we get into this experience of the kingdom by blood that was shed.
And so Jesus is the mediator of a new covenant. So they had many mediators of the old covenant. There were mediators. Moses was a sort of mediator. The prophets were mediators. They spoke for God. The priests obviously were mediators, and the high priest in particular was the mediator who made these sacrifices on behalf of the people.
Yeah.
In Egypt, when they thought God had abandoned them, there's a sacrifice of a Passover lamb.
Yeah.
Right. And
that's a mediator.
At Mount Sinai, when they're all terrified, Moses comes down. He says, right, build an altar. We're going to have a sacrifice.
Yeah.
And this will deal with your concern that God's going to come and get you. And then as they settle on Mount Zion, there's now a systematized mechanism of ongoing sacrifices, meticulously prescribed in the law, codified. So there's always mediator, there's always sacrifice in the old covenant, and Jesus, the mediator, singular, of a new covenant, has sprinkled his blood.
We already saw this too, that the mediator of the covenant, the new covenant, is defined by God creating a new heart in his people. This is chapter 8. This is a new deal in which he actually rejuvenates us and renews us from the inside out. God's sovereignty is effective in exuding itself through grace and mercy toward undeserving people who he makes into people who somehow are able to at least seem like they deserve. It's crazy.
Well, what strikes me from this is if so much effort has been put into the tenses and moods of the language to say we've got here already.
Yeah.
Right. And so much effort has gone into describing where here is, and that is heaven, 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 over and over and over again. Yeah. Right. It's abundantly clear that the point is we have arrived at the real thing. Right. And now we know how, and that is through the mediating work of Jesus, who's inaugurated a new covenant through his blood, which tells us a lot about who he is and what he does. Whoever he is and whatever he's done must be sufficient to usher us perfectly into eternal perfection, perfectly. Such that there will never be any sin left over, right? Because God can't introduce us as sort of slightly clean people into eternity, because that microbic little fault is just going to amplify throughout time and space, right? Like it's got to be a clean room. It has to be.
Yeah.
Right. It's got to be perfectly sanitized.
He makes us perfect. Well, that's right in the text, right? The spirits of the righteous made perfect.
Yes. Which is
complete.
Which is one of the teleology words.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's one of those words that, well, first of all, it's passive in mood, so it means it's done to you. But secondly, it means brought into your ending state, right, or perfected, complete.
Yeah.
No more change needed state.
And the sprinkled blood, which we already saw, is like the Lysol of the old covenant, right?
It must be perfectly Lysolic. Morally. It must, because we've been brought into heaven and there's no more work to be done, and we're fit to be there in the presence of God fully.
Yeah.
And there won't have to be a repeat next year or anything.
Yeah.
Then his work must have been perfect.
Yeah.
Must have been full, perfect, and sufficient.
Leaving nothing to be desired.
Which really must make you ask a question. Well, who is he then? That he can be perfect in what he does. It must logically only be God
himself.
It's the only explanation.
Yeah.
Because anyone else would be submitting imperfect work on our behalf. It wouldn't be enough to put us in heaven.
And it's kind of an antidote to religious tryhardism too.
Yes.
Right? Like, if that's the way that you get into heaven,
right,
then it's pretty clear that it's not like a graded thing. Like the people who have, he did well enough to get the top 30th percentile.
Right. Right. It was good.
But if you were below that, if you're, the guys who drink too much, they can't make it in or something like that.
Yeah.
I know it's such a radically new and different.
So we're closer to, so they got increasingly close to God, but there was always this sort of mediator and there was always something in the way, and they were always like having to go back and do it again. We've got to the real thing, and we've arrived already, and we've been brought into it by him. And it worked. And if it worked, then he must be God himself. So it feels to me a bit like, we're near the end of the series, but it really feels like Hebrews is finally getting to its point. Jesus is God.
Yeah.
It's the only logical deduction from this set of information.
Huh.
Right. And so what are you going to do about it? So what? I like verse 28. Say thank you.
Therefore, let us be grateful for receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, and let us offer to God acceptable worship with reverence and awe. For our God is a consuming fire.
I like that.
That's both fear and thanksgiving, gratitude.
I don't know if this was like this in your childhood, but in my childhood, being ungrateful was possibly the second most serious sin that you could commit. Like being ungrateful. This was a really serious sin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was the first?
Being common.
Oh.
Like
don't be extraordinary. Not being extraordinary.
No, common as in like being a bit vulgar, like eating food in the street. Yeah, that kind of thing. Not having the right belt. Anything that smacked of being common. Not having my knife and fork the wrong way around.
This is totally like describing my life.
Middle
I must
class.
Be extremely common.
Well, no, I mean that's right. I think amongst thrusting working class aspirational families, the idea of there were many social mores that
be worthy of advancement.
Yeah, that would enable you to clamber up to the upper echelons of the middle class.
But don't be ungrateful.
That was big. That was a big deal, you know.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So I remember someone, the Sunday school teacher, gave me a magazine, a Christian comic or something like that, and it didn't look very good to me. It looked a little dull, and I was not sufficiently grateful. And I got driven round to her house, which is about 8 miles, which is a long way.
Uh-huh.
And I had to write an apology and then hand it over and also give a verbal apology to her face on her doorstep for not being grateful for this.
Wow, that's
sort of publication she'd given me. Being ungrateful is like a big deal.
Oh wow, yeah. I think that's a good lesson to learn. Although.
It was overtaught, I think, in my setting.
Maybe, yeah.
It was overemphasized.
Yeah, I think you can just be like, this is really nice. Like being grateful for being on vacation or something like that. You know, you're sitting on the beach.
So let us be grateful for receiving. I mean, I do like that. It's like literally the only thing for you to do, because you said there's nothing you can do. The only thing that you can do is say thanks. That's what you bring to the equation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The co-eternally existent Lord who lays down his life for you says, I tell you what, I'll bring you into perfect eternity. And you're like, well, okay, what can I bring? Can I
well, what do we do?
A salad? Like, what do I bring?
Yeah. Well, why do we do that? Why do we want to pick up the check for friends
I'll get the tip
at dinner?
Yeah,
I'll get the tip. It's because we want to save some dignity. We want to remain on equal standing with them.
Oh.
But if you just say thanks, you have acknowledged you've gone down a rung. They are your benefactor now.
Oh, yes.
This is so why good. This is such a big thing in like place like Fox Chapel. Like people, there's power dynamics.
Yes.
So if you just are grateful, you have no power.
No.
But you're just receiving. But the reality is you have no power.
Right, and you received it.
And you just receive.
You're like, well, yeah, that's right. I'll bring the dessert. I'll get the tip. We're trying to exactly right. This is very profound. So we're trying to contribute in some way.
Yeah.
To this thing.
This is maybe why people, why we're all semi-Pelagians, right? Why we try to justify ourselves by our works and try to do good for God. Because in some level, maybe some subconsciously, we want to be able to keep some sort of edge on him.
Right, but all you can offer him, as one who's surrounded by shaky things, is a broken lawnmower.
Yeah.
Literally the only thing you can give him is a thing that is going to disappear.
I mean, I guess we want to be able to stand at the pearly gates and be like, look at the life that I lived. I did this and this and this and this and this and this and this. You know, I
someone says this to Jesus, right? And he says, I'm going to say to you, away from me, you evildoers, I never knew you. That's not a good tactic.
Yeah. Well, it's because you're just trying to play him like a candy machine, but just be grateful. You don't deserve heaven.
If he's really holy, as in Mount Sinai level of holiness, if God is really that holy, and he is really that keen on bringing us into perfection, and so keen that he manifests in the ultimate way, not as smoke or fire, but as a man, and retains his holiness, and then lays his life down in our place. He dies our actual death. He dies the punishment. And so God, the judge of all, is judged by he himself.
Yeah.
If that really happened, and therefore we can have the confidence to say that we're now enrolled in heaven.
Yeah.
We even have a foot in heaven already. Already.
Yeah.
Then I'm not quite sure what it is we think we could bring to that equation that would make it any better.
No.
So we say thanks.
Say thanks.
There you go.
Worship him.
Yeah.
This is one of those moments where Ben Wolpe would really come in handy. Isn't he coming?
Yeah, and indeed, he's already here. We hope Ben Wolpe's coming.
The Wolpe.
The quest for the historical Wolpe. Maybe he's real. I wonder what he sounds like.
Oh, he sounds like this now.
He has a strange voice.
I am Ben Wolpe.
This has been a podcast of Christchurch Fox Chapel. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you all very soon. And of course, it goes without saying that we thank you for stopping by.
Stay classy.
But mostly thanks for stopping by.
Stay classy.